ABC Radio, Melbourne and Victoria.
Dilruk Jayasinha filling in for Jacinta Parsons. Now, if you might have seen, if you lived around Hawthorn, you may have picked up a few little bits of poetry here and there on your walks, because writer Ricky Kuruppu has been under the Instagram name Boy Under the Bridge, has been leaving poetry around the streets of Hawthorn and is bringing a lot of smiles to a lot of people. And it's very exciting to have him join us on the phone. Ricky, thank you first of all for doing that. How are you finding the vibe shift now that the lockdown has been eased?
This morning I actually went to my local cafe and was able to sit outside reading a book in the sun, and it was just nice to actually see the expression on people's faces, and I think people are going to appreciate it in a completely new light, something that before was any other day and often taken for granted.
I'm a big champion of gratitude, and unfortunately a lot of gratitude sometimes comes from not knowing what you had till it's gone. And I hope that feeling continues for people to realize even the simple act of sitting at a cafe reading a book is something that can be taken away and not to take it for granted.
Absolutely. I've had a gratitude practice for about 10 years now, so I've got a lot of journals full of things, and I often enjoy just flipping through and just looking at the little things that I had that if I didn't write it down, it would have just kind of slipped through my mind completely.
That's fantastic. Tell me, because let's have a gratitude off. I feel like it's rare that we have people getting competitive about gratitude, but I mean it in a positive way, because it's something that I truly believe has been one of the things that have helped me personally. And to this point, to be honest, I've kind of identified it as being a bit of a superpower now, because I've been practicing it for so long that, because I wrote in my gratitude journal about 2 months ago, the first on the list was, I am grateful that my problems are so small and manageable that a list about gratitude helps me move through it. Because I realize that in itself is quite a thing to be grateful for, because not all problems can just easily be penned away. So tell me what your gratitude system looks like.
Every day I would just, at the end, I just kind of do a smiley face and then list in dot points things that I'm grateful for, and often it might just include, having friends and family, especially during this COVID pandemic. And even though I was made redundant at the start of the pandemic, still to be in a country where we have, adequate, welfare support, and just to be able to live in an area, although we were limited to 5 kilometres, to be surrounded by such a beautiful community and have the ability to go for these beautiful walks.
That's so true. I mean, for me, one of the things that I tried to trick myself into when I did the 5 kilometre radius and when I was going out and about, I would try to imagine myself as being a tourist. I love Melbourne, and I've been living in Melbourne for 16 years. And I thought, if I was a tourist, what are the things that I would take photos of, and what are the things I would stop to, take a selfie in front of? And that really helped me reframe, these things that I'd walk past every day for the last 16 years that I didn't really think about, as going, oh my God, that actually is a really beautiful building. And I found that to be a little trick that has helped me.
And I think I loved really seeing the teddy bears and the spoonbills that people were creating, especially around this time when flowers were blooming. My partner, she has a real eye for flowers, so she'd often stop and say, I want to take this photo of this plant, and she'd tell me what it is. So, and that's kind of why I started doing what I did as well, because I just realized it was an opportunity to spice up these otherwise really routine walks that people were going on.
Yeah, and I think people... sometimes I feel like gratitude sometimes gets a bit of a bad rap, because I at least found in my experience when I talk to friends about it, they're like, oh, get it, I should be grateful for being in this and that. And I'm like, I know that's, I would approach it in a different way personally, because, it's something, again, I refer to it as a practice because it's not a perfect, I have to keep practicing it. And for me, one of my intro levels into it was, rather than necessarily looking at it as, what am I grateful for? Because sometimes you can't really be grateful or feel the gratitude if you're just comparing yourself to someone who's worse off than you, because your experience is your experience, right? So I try to think of things that have gone well for me compared to yesterday or compared to last week or last month, because that is a very real experience that my brain can associate with being, oh yeah, that is objectively better. And and one of the things, Ricky, I don't know if this it sounds very silly, but I would try and think of three things that went well, and I would do it when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning. So I won't pick up the toothbrush until I think of the first one, and then I grab the first one. Then before I put the toothpaste on, I have to think of a second one, and before I can start brushing, I have to think of a third one. So by the time I'm actually brushing my teeth for that 2 minutes, I have three things swirling around in my head as I'm swirling the toothpaste around in my mouth, and it really sets me up for a good mood for the day.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people, I find it sounds a bit naff sometimes to talk about gratitude, but I think the type of stuff that you do as well has helped a lot of people, take notice of what's in Hawthorn in particular, obviously because of your 5 kilometer radius.
Yeah.
And here's something I want to ask you,
Sure.
because I'm originally from Sri Lanka, and I had a few classmates with the last name Kuruppu, and I was wondering, is your heritage Sri Lankan yourself?
It absolutely is.
Oh, that's so fascinating. And how far back does your family go to Sri Lanka? Were you born here or were you born overseas?
I was born and raised here.
Uh-huh.
Unfortunately, that's as much as I have to give. I was raised in Australia, so my friends actually refer to me as a coconut, which means essentially white on the inside.
And brown on the outside, yeah. I get Oreo cookie. So I understand totally. But speaking of the idea of Sri Lanka, one of your most recent poems on Instagram really struck me too hard, I would say. But you said, homesickness is the thorn in our foot, reminding us that there is a backyard we're lucky enough to belong to. And it's such a wonderful sentiment.
Thank you.
And it really resonated with me as we approach Christmas, and it'll be the first Christmas I'm away from my family. You yourself, Ricky, technically, you grew up in Sydney, so it sounds like you're away from your family as well.
Well, I grew up in Brisbane, so I spent the first 26 years of my life in Brisbane, then did a year in Tonga, in the South Pacific, where I volunteered and lived, and then I came back to Australia and then moved to Sydney, and then after that I've been in Melbourne ever since. So yeah, I've got kind of roots everywhere, but Brisbane is where my parents and sister are, and last time I was there was November last year, and it's likely I won't be back till November or December or January, who knows when things kind of lift.
Yeah, it is. Is there anything in particular that's helping you get through that sense of dread?
I think it's that I've got such, good quality, amazing friendships and a partner in Melbourne. So I do feel like I've got my roots here as well. And all the people that I have in my life, like time and distance doesn't change a thing. And with my parents, like we still do phone calls and everything like that. But I do know they miss me deeply, and it's as they get older, it's kind of a case of you got to balance off like being there for your family, but also living your life. And it's kind of I have a few people that have moved away, and it's kind of like this balance that you kind of got to do.
It is definitely a balance thing, and it's sometimes I'm a very analytical person and can overthink things, and it's hard for me not to have those analyses happen at nighttime where I'm like, oh, I stuck around here for the last 8 months and I haven't done any real work. I could have done this from Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
But I do find it interesting that you've been quite open about some of the mental health struggles that you've had, because I was quite lucky enough a couple of weeks ago to be announced as an ambassador for Mental Health Australia.
Okay.
And I was very proud to get that, because for me, it took a long time to admit that I had mental health difficulties at times, but B, also be comfortable enough to tell anyone, let alone a therapist, that I was going through it. Did you, have you found, I guess my question is, for someone like me who was, say, listening 4 or 5 years ago that wasn't comfortable talking about it, I would love if you can share some of the experiences you had by being able to open up.
Yeah, well, I guess growing up throughout my life, everyone knew me as the class clown. I was the funny guy. And then I'm 33 now, but in my early 20s, I started to kind of go through a bit of a rough patch, finding myself in the world, and I just encountered these feelings I never had before, and it was just hard to open up about them. So what I did was kind of opened up a blog, boyunderthebridge.com, which was anonymous, and I just started kind of pouring myself into that in my writing. I would use internet message boards anonymously, and I found that to be really helpful. But I guess my kind of coming out story about my mental health experiences was when I went to Tonga. I wrote a book called Living in Cream, and that was kind of my story, the last 5 years of my life really condensed. And I was faced with a decision. I said I had to decide whether I wanted to put my face on this book, because Boy Under the Bridge was an alias, it was otherwise anonymous. And not only did I put my face on the book, but I took my shirt off, covered myself in ice cream, and put that on the book's cover. Not to do a self-plug, but the whole thing
plug away.
It's free on boyunderthebridge.com, but it really covers my mental health experiences and how I kind of really found it to lead me to embracing myself and the things that worked for me. And that was a big move, because a lot of people were like, wow, okay, Ricky, I didn't know this about you. And I actually said in the book, you're probably someone who knows me for a long time, or doesn't know a lot about me. So it was kind of like, it was a surprise to a lot of people, but it was met with a really great response. People didn't feel like, because I was the funny guy, I couldn't share the side of me. I realized that there was space for me to express my sensitivity and also my masculinity, because back then I was heavy into like bodybuilding and weightlifting, and I could also be this guy that, wrote poetry.
It is so interesting you frame it like that, because I think a lot of the difficulties I had in terms of being able to admit to these problems was linked to masculinity, and how we see it as, struggling. The word, struggling seems to be associated with weakness, as opposed to just part of the human experience. And I found it, for me particularly culturally, and I don't know if this is the same for you having grown up in Australia, but I know that when my parents heard that I started seeing a psychologist, there was a little of apprehension, because back in Sri Lanka we didn't really open up about those things. And I was lucky enough to have a family where we talk about this stuff eventually, and Mum sort of admitted to me that her difficulty with it was she felt that if I had to see a therapist, she could not help but feel like she might have failed me, or might have maybe not given me enough of the tools herself so that I can manage it. And I kind of used the example of toothbrushing again, because I said to her, look, if I went to the dentist every 6 months, would you say that you didn't teach me how to brush my teeth properly? She's like, no. I'm like, well, it's kind of the same thing. There's just certain things that I need a professional to go in there and get, do a bit of a thorough clean. And did you find that resistance at all coming with given your cultural background?
I did. I actually wrote my book, Living in Cream, in 2014, but I didn't actually share it with my parents till 3 years later.
Right.
So it's kind of like someone actually pointed out the other day, actually a therapist that I've started to see, and said, Ricky, you wrote a book and you didn't tell your parents for 3 years. And I realized that it would be met with a bit of apprehension. And I remember my mum actually said, you shouldn't write about these things, because traditionally you don't talk about these things. Yeah. But I said to them, this vulnerability is actually my gift to the world. And it's actually, I often say, people meet in the wound. So when I show myself and show people what I'm going through, people are actually able to meet me there, because they're going through the same kind of things. And particularly with my writing and me sharing the pieces that I write, it's people who are just going about their day that are finding these snippets and going oh, someone else is experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing.
It made me chuckle hearing you talk about the book released for 3 years and not telling your parents. My parents found out that I see a therapist a year after I had recorded the TV show Husey, We Have a Problem, where my dad was illegally watching it on YouTube, I think. He stumbled upon his son talking about seeing a therapist on national television in Australia, but somehow I wasn't comfortable enough telling Mum and Dad, these people that I trust implicitly. It's really remarkable how much we hold back, especially from the people that are closest to us.
Yeah, and I really see things changing. I'm studying counselling at the moment, I've worked as with an organisation called Batia, where I'd speak in high schools to students about masculinity, and I see everything's changing, especially when you get celebrities opening up and being vulnerable. It's really setting things in motion, which is really great to see.
Yeah, and look, I need to start wrapping up shortly, but I did go across your website, which is Boy Under the Bridge again, and there is a link to you performing stand-up, but I believe it was just the one stand-up comedy gig?
Yeah, I've always been a person just to throw myself at things, so I did give stand-up a go, and that was, not the case of being very vulnerable, but I'm definitely planning to do it again once the kind of lockdown restriction ease a bit more.
That's fantastic. And where can just let people know where they can see more of your poetry?
It's boyunderthebridge.com. With my poetry, I actually have like a little poetry book that I've also made for people who are around Australia. So if people contact me on Instagram, I'm happy to post them out because there's been quite a bit of demand since I was featured in The Age and on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just wanted to ask, I have written a short little poetry piece. It's kind of in the theme of chronic illness, which I know the show's host, Jacinta Parsons, also wrote a book about. Would it be okay for me just to share that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, we have some time.
Yeah. So is that okay?
Yeah, if we've got a little bit of time.
It's only 30 seconds.
Please go for it then.
Yeah, just to give it a bit of a heads up. This was actually written after I spoke to someone. I won't say her name, but she's a dear friend. She's a single parent. She cares for disability clients, and she's also dealing with endometritis, which is a condition a lot of women suffer with. And so often when people do share their stories and experiences with me, I just feel like the words come through me. So I'm writing this one for her and for everyone else there who also is dealing with the chronic illness. And this one is called Soldier On. So I'll start. Every smile to a stranger is also a salute, because I know all too well what it's like to be standing on the front lines of a battle that no one else can see, that no one knows anything about. Sadly, silent victories and stumbles are only met with more silence when they deserve so much more. So if you're hearing this and I'm yet to see you, I hope you still feel seen and that you're able to keep digging, finding more strength from the wellspring of your soul. And you can keep doing what you've been doing for so long, silently, without complaint, and selflessly putting others' needs ahead of your own, which is to soldier on.
Well, thank you, Ricky. That's really wonderful. And again, boyunderthebridge.com is where you can find all of your poetry. And and what do you think there's going to be a change in vibe now when you go ahead because of the way things are starting to be a little bit more positive?
Do you mean like in my community?
In your work. I'm always fascinated how the way the experiences around us influence our creative outlets. And, not that I'm saying your work has not been positive, but it definitely has the voice of the lockdown in it.
Yeah, it definitely has. I've really, this whole experience, especially, you having me on air, has shown me the value of arts and creativity. It actually used to be something I was a bit shameful about, typing away my typewriter. It's an artistic thing. It's not making me money, so there's a bit of shame there. But this whole experience has shown me that there is that it can make a difference. And I've actually had some really beautiful people come forward to me that are actually wanting to collaborate. There's a really talented muralist called Amanda Newman who does these beautiful murals, like Kathy Freeman, and we're going to be working on a piece together. There's a guy called Ben from BL Media Solutions who's actually offered to make a video with me.
That's
and
excellent.
Also there's someone called Lisa, which I'd love to give a shout out to. She's a photographer, and we're going to be releasing a book called Words and Their Textures together. So it's been great just to meet other people who are also in their creative element.
Thank you, Ricky. That's Ricky Kuruppu from Boy Under the Bridge. We'll now go to a song which is Feeling Groovy by Simon and Garfunkel.